Get your rusted-out truck off my property, you broke grease monkey!
Rhonda Coleman's voice cracked across the Bankhead driveway like a slap, and the coffee came a half-second behind it. A full cup of it, thrown, exploding against Dorian's faded charcoal coveralls and running down into his boots. Steam rose off the fabric. Somewhere behind her, up on the porch, Bianca lifted her phone and started filming, laughing before the cup even landed. 9 neighbors stood on their steps in the July heat and watched. Nobody moved. One of them turned her camera sideways for a better angle. Dorian did not flinch. He did not wipe his chest. He looked at Rhonda the way a man looks at a storm he already knows the ending of. Calm, unhurried, almost sorry for her. Then he crouched, right there in front of all of them, and picked up the shards of the shattered mug with his bare hands, so the barefoot kids next door wouldn't cut their feet. What Rhonda Coleman did not know, what none of them knew, was that the man she'd just doused in cold coffee could have bought her house, her street, and every house she'd ever rented with one phone call. If injustice like this makes your blood run hot, subscribe, and tell me your country and your local time down in the comments. I want to know who's standing with me on this one. But to understand how a man worth more than that entire neighborhood ended up on his knees in that driveway, we have to rewind 3 weeks to the Buckhead boardroom, where Dorian Hughes threw away everything they wanted to hand him. The Hughes family did not have meetings. They had rituals. The long room on the 40th floor of the Peachtree Tower had a table cut from a single slab of walnut, so heavy it had been craned in through a window before the glass was set. 14 chairs. 13 of them held people who had built, bought, or married their way into the Hughes name. The last one held Dorian. He sat with his hands folded, saying nothing, which was its own kind of language in that family. His mother, Vivian Hughes, sat at the head, 61 years old and dressed in a deep purple suit that cost more than most people in Bankhead cleared in a season. Vivian had taken a regional property company worth $11 million. When her husband died and turned it into Hughes Holdings, valued now somewhere north of $400 million, depending on which quarter you asked. She did not raise her voice. She had learned a long time ago that the quiet ones get listened to. The Sterling merger closes in 90 days, she said. The board wants certainty. Charles Sterling wants certainty. And certainty, Dorian, has a name. It has a face. It's a wedding. Down the table, old Terence, her brother, the company's oldest hand, leaned in. The boy's 29. Half the city thinks he doesn't exist because we keep him out of the press. People marry. It stabilizes valuations. It always has. Her name is Chanel Sterling, Vivian went on, as if Dorian were a document she was reading into the record. Wharton. Fluent in 3 languages. Her father controls the 2 commercial blocks we need on the west side. You marry her, the blocks come with the marriage, and this company stops bleeding money on a lawsuit that could run 6 years. Dorian looked at the window. 40 floors down, Atlanta moved in its heat. Say something, his mother said. You've described a transaction, Dorian said. You've used the word wedding to make it sound like it isn't one. The room went still in the way rooms did around him. Vivian's jaw tightened by a fraction only her son would have caught. Every woman I've ever been introduced to in this family, Dorian said, smiles at the name before she smiles at me. She laughs at my jokes a half-beat too fast. She's kind to the waiter because she's read that I notice things like that. I have never once, in 29 years, watched a woman decide how to treat me before she knew what I was worth. Not once. That's a romantic problem, Vivian said. This is a business meeting. It's the same problem. He turned from the window. You raised me to run $400 million worth of people's homes. Renters, families, people who lose sleep over a $40 late fee that this company charges and this table has never once discussed. And you want to hand me a wife the same way you'd hand me the West Side blocks. As inventory, Terence made a sound in his throat. Character does not run a company, son. Discipline does. Character is the only thing that tells you what to do with the discipline, Dorian said. That landed somewhere. Vivian didn't answer right away. She had said something close to that herself, once, years ago, to a younger version of the man now sitting across from her, and she hadn't expected to have it turned around on her at her own table. What do you want, Dorian? Not a question. A door held open an inch. 1 year, he said. For what? To find out who a person is when they think I'm nobody. He unfolded his hands. I want to go somewhere the name Hughes means nothing. I want to work, real work, with my hands, for real money that runs out. I want to live like the people whose rent checks pay for this table. And I want to find out whether a woman can look at a man she's certain has nothing, and still treat him like he's worth something. Because if she can't, she has no business standing next to a man who'll one day decide whether 10,000 families keep their homes. The board erupted, quietly, the way rich people erupt. It was reckless. It was a security nightmare. It would be in the press. It would tank the merger. What if something happened to him? What would the Sterlings think? Vivian let it run. Then she lifted one hand, and it stopped. Where? She said. You don't need to know where. 2 people will. That's it. She studied her son for a long moment. She saw her husband in him, the same stubbornness that had made her fall for a man with nothing to his name. Back when she'd had prospects, and he'd had a toolbox and a used truck. She had spent 30 years becoming a person who would have talked that younger self out of loving him. She did not enjoy noticing that. 1 year, Vivian said finally, and a condition. If you find her, this woman who sees a man and not a wallet, you bring her home, to me. And if you don't, if the year runs out and you come back alone, you marry Chanel Sterling and you never raise this childish experiment with me again. Those are the terms. Those are the terms, Dorian said. Terence was already shaking his head. Vivian ignored him. She looked at her son, the way a woman looks at a bridge she's decided not to burn yet, and she said, You have your father's foolishness. God help you. It's the only part of him I ever really trusted. 2 days later, a man named Otis Freeman drove a 15-year-old pickup out of a service entrance under the Peachtree Tower, with Dorian Hughes in the passenger seat, dressed in coveralls that had cost $11 at a work supply store off Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway. Pops Otis had run maintenance for Hughes Holdings for 26 years. He was the one man in the company Vivian trusted with a key to every building, and the one man Dorian trusted with a secret. He was 71, slow-moving with reading glasses that lived on a cord around his neck, and a way of saying a great deal by saying almost nothing. You understand, Otis said, as the tower shrank in the mirror. Down where we're going, you are not Dorian Hughes. You're my late brother's boy. Your shop in Macon went under. You came up here to start over. That's the whole story. Simple stories hold. Fancy ones fall apart. I understand. No, you don't. Otis said it gently, eyes on the road. You understand it up here. He tapped his own temple. You'll understand it for real the first time you're hungry with money still 3 days off, and somebody looks at you like you're furniture. That's a different kind of understanding, son. That's the kind you came for. They drove west, out of the glass and into the brick. The buildings got lower. The billboards changed languages. On English Avenue, the porches sagged, and the churches outnumbered the grocery stores 3 to 1. and every third house had a hand-painted sign in the yard. Plates sold here, hair done here. We buy junk cars. Otis had a house on a short street off Joseph E. Boone Boulevard, a narrow shotgun place he'd owned free and clear since 1994, with a garage out back where he still fixed cars for cash on the weekends, because a man his age needs a reason to get up. There was a room off the kitchen with a mattress, a wooden chair, and a window that looked at the neighbor's fence. The first night, Dorian lay awake on that mattress until nearly 3. Not because it was hard, though it was, but because of the sound. In Buckhead, the silence had been engineered, 40 floors of insulated quiet you paid for. Here, the silence had things in it. A dog 2 yards over, a car with a bad belt, a woman somewhere laughing, then not. Somebody's baby. A train. It was the sound of people living within earshot of each other, because they could not afford the space that buys them apart. And Dorian lay there and listened to it and understood, dimly, that he had never once in his life heard it before. The next morning, Otis woke him before the sun. "If you're going to be a mechanic," he said, "you wake up before the men who need their cars." Dorian learned the work the way you learn anything real. Badly, at first, and with his knuckles. He learned that a brake job takes twice as long when you've never done one, and the bolt is seized, and it's 95 degrees Fahrenheit in a garage with no fan. He learned that his soft office hands would blister, split, callous, and finally toughen. He learned Otis's rule, which was that you tell a man the truth about his car, even when the lie makes more money, because the man will be back, and so will his cousin, and so will his cousin's church. He learned that people looked at his coveralls before they looked at his face. That was the part he had come for, and it still landed harder than he'd braced for. He carried tools. He picked up parts. He sold a few things at the Saturday market off Bankhead to make the story hold. A box of alternators, a milk crate of second-hand tools, and he watched the way a clean shirt got a nod and a dirty one got nothing. A woman once handed him her heavy bag to hold while she counted her cash, and told him, without looking up, not to think about running. She'd memorized his face. A group of young men his own age looked straight through him. He was learning, in his body now and not his head, the exact weight of being treated like you're nobody. And he was building a list, quietly, of every person in Bankhead who treated a nobody like a somebody anyway. There were more of them than the people in the Peachtree boardroom would ever believe. And there was one, he would come to think, who was the reason he'd been born stubborn. Her name was Imani Robinson, and the first time Dorian saw her, she was carrying something heavier than she should have been carrying, which he would learn was the truest single fact about her life. Imani Robinson woke at 4:40 every morning in a house that did not love her, and by the time the sky over English Avenue had gone from black to the color of dishwater, she had already swept the porch, wiped the kitchen, started a pot of grits nobody would thank her for, and laid out her stepsister's work clothes across the foot of a bed she was not allowed to sit on. She was 24. She had her mother's hands and her mother's habit of humming when she thought no one could hear, and almost nothing else of her, because her mother had died when Imani was 9, and grief in a child is a thing that gets folded away and worked around, not through. Her father had married Rhonda Coleman 2 years after the funeral. Imani had wanted, at 11, so badly to be loved by the new woman in the house that she'd have done anything, and she had. She'd fetched and carried and smiled and made herself small, and it had taught Rhonda a lesson Rhonda never unlearned, which was that Imani could be used. When Imani's father died of a heart attack in the frozen food aisle of a Kroger 3 years back, Whatever thin performance of family had held the house together died with him. The house had been his. Now it was Rhonda's in every way that mattered, and Imani lived in it the way a live-in maid lives in a house. Present, necessary, and never once a daughter. Rhonda came out of her room that morning already frowning, a bright silk robe the color of a stop sign wrapped around her, hair tied, phone in her hand. She looked at the swept porch and found the one leaf. "You call this swept?" "Morning, Miss Rhonda. Do it again." Rhonda dropped into the good chair and started scrolling. "And Bianca needs her nails money on the counter by 9. She's got the thing at the Sterling Girls tonight." Bianca was Rhonda's daughter, 22, and the closest thing to a house pet that walks on 2 legs. She was pretty in the way that gets a girl told she's pretty until she believes it excuses everything else. And she had never in her life carried anything heavier than a handbag. She came out around 9 in a dress that still had the tag tucked into the collar, took one look at the grits, and said she wasn't eating that prison food. And where was her nails money? And had Imani washed the blue dress because she might want the blue dress? "I'll wash it," Imani said. "You'll wash it today," Bianca said, and left the room without waiting to see the word land. Here is the thing the neighbors on that street mostly didn't know. And the thing that mattered most. 2 years earlier, Rhonda had sat Imani down at that same kitchen table with a stack of papers and a pen and a story about a business loan that was going to fix everything. A little salon, a real income, security for all of them, family looking out for family. She'd needed a cosigner, just a signature, a formality. Imani had a job and a clean record and no debt, which is to say Imani had the one thing Rhonda had spent through years ago, a credit score. And Imani, who was 22 then and still, God help her, hoping to be loved, had signed. There was no salon. There was $38,000, most of it gone Imani never knew where. And there was a truth about co-signing that nobody had ever explained to her, which is that a co-signer is not a character reference. A co-signer is a second borrower. When Rhonda stopped paying, and Rhonda stopped paying almost immediately, the lender did not come after Rhonda first, and Imani second. It came after them both at once, equally, and it was Imani's name and Imani's score that took the hit, because Imani was the one with something to lose. 90 days late, 120. A charge-off. A number that had been over 700, and was now, the last time she'd been brave enough to look, 541. She had learned what that number does. It is not an abstraction. A 541 means the apartment she'd applied for, the one over on the good side of Grove Park with the working AC, and the door that locked, sent back a form letter. It means the phone in a plan under her own name is impossible, so her number lives under Rhonda's account, which means Rhonda can shut it off, and has, twice, to make a point. It means she is not stuck in that house out of weakness. She is stuck in it the way a person is stuck to the floor by a debt with her name on it, and no lawyer, and no cushion, and no one, in the whole world, whose job it is to be on her side. That is a cage. It just doesn't look like one from the porch. So she worked. Days at a laundromat on Hollowell, folding other people's clothes and making change, and 4 nights a week she picked up delivery runs on a bike with a cracked phone mount, carrying hot bags up walk-ups for tips that some nights came and some nights didn't. She was tired in a way that had stopped being an event and become a climate. And she did not complain, because she had learned young that complaining in that house was a door that only opened inward, onto more. The morning Dorian first saw her, Rhonda sent them both to the market. Imani to carry, Bianca to supervise the carrying. The Saturday market off Bankhead was a good place to watch people be who they are. Fold-out tables, hand-lettered cardboard, the smell of hot oil and cut fruit and diesel. A man selling bootleg movies next to a woman selling collard greens, next to an old vendor named Miss Clara, who'd sold vegetables from the same corner for 30 years, and whose hands had gone bad enough, now that she arranged each tomato slow, like she was setting a table for company. Bianca walked ahead with her empty hands and her tagged dress. Imani followed with the basket. At Miss Clara's table, Bianca stopped, picked up a bunch of greens, squeezed it like she was checking a pulse, and made a face. "How much is this sad little bunch?" $2, baby, Miss Clara said. $2. Bianca laughed loud for an audience. "For weeds? My grandmother grew better than this in a bucket." She dropped the greens back on the pile, hard, and a few loose tomatoes rolled off the edge and hit the dirt. Miss Clara bent for them, slow, and her slow was painful to watch. Imani was already down. She set the basket in the dust and gathered the tomatoes, wiped each one on her own shirt before she set it back, and looked up at the old woman with an apology that had nothing to do with tomatoes. "I'm sorry, Miss Clara. Don't mind her." "Who are you apologizing for?" Bianca snapped. "Did I tell her to put trash on a table?" Imani didn't answer. She finished stacking the tomatoes and she paid for the greens Bianca had insulted, $2 out of her own tip money, and she pressed it into Miss Clara's bad hand and closed the fingers over it before the old woman could argue. 10 feet away, next to a milk crate of second-hand alternators, Dorian Hughes stood in his charcoal coveralls and watched a woman he'd never met spend money she didn't have to protect the dignity of a stranger, while her own stepsister filmed the moment for no one. He had been in Bankhead for 11 days. He had seen a lot of small cruelties and a handful of small graces. This was the first time something in his chest actually moved. He didn't go to her then. He'd learned that much. A strange man in dirty coveralls does not walk up on a woman in a market. But when Bianca had loaded the basket and 2 heavy bags besides, and turned to go with her hands still empty, and Imani bent to take all of it at once, Dorian stepped over. "Afternoon. Name's Dorian. That's more than one person should carry. Let me get the bags for you." Imani looked up at him. Coveralls. Oil under the nails. A face that didn't match the coveralls, though she couldn't have said why and didn't try to. What she noticed was the voice. Even, unhurried, no angle in it that she could find, and she had a good ear for angles. Bianca turned around and looked Dorian up and down, like she was reading a health code violation. You want to help us. Loads heavy." Bianca laughed, and this time it was the mean laugh, the one she saved for people she'd decided were beneath the cost of politeness. "Shift on, grease monkey. I'm not walking through this market next to a man who smells like a transmission. People will think we know you." She hooked the last bag over Imani's shoulder and started walking. "Bring it, Imani. And don't let him touch the bags. I'm not trying to lose my mama's crayfish to a bum." The people nearby had gone quiet. Imani's face had gone hot. Not for herself, she was used to herself, but for the man who'd only offered to help. "I'm sorry," she said to him, low. Please don't mind her. It's all right." And then, because he'd decided something, Dorian bent and picked up the 2 heaviest bags anyway. "Where to?" She tried to stop him and he wouldn't be stopped, and there was nothing aggressive in it, just a quiet refusal to let her carry the whole world by herself, and something about that undid a small knot in her she hadn't known was tied. They walked. Bianca went ahead complaining the whole way. "Walk faster. Don't let him near the bags. If anything's missing, I'm telling Mama." Dorian said nothing. He watched a young woman get spoken to like she was owned, and he did the math on it, and the number he got made him quieter than usual. At the house, Bianca went in first. pointed at the little storeroom off the side, said, "Put it away, I'm exhausted," and was gone. Imani lowered the basket off her head and wiped her face with the back of her wrist, and when she reached for a bag, Dorian was already lifting it. "You've done enough," she said. "So have you." They stacked the food in the storeroom in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, which surprised them both. When it was done, she stood in the doorway, uncertain, twisting the edge of her shirt. "Thank you. I don't have anything to give you for it. I didn't help you for money." She looked at him then, really looked, because, in her experience, that sentence was always the setup for a different kind of payment being named. She waited for it. It didn't come. He just picked up his empty hands and showed them, palms out, a small joke, and something in her face eased. "Why does she talk to you like that?" Dorian asked. Not prying, just asking. Imani glanced back at the house. "She's my stepsister." He waited. "My mama died when I was little. My daddy married her mama. Then my daddy died. She said it the way you say a thing you've stopped being able to cry about. This is the only home I've got left. Nobody should get used to being talked to like that. You get used to a lot of things." She said it without self-pity, which was somehow worse. Then, from inside, Bianca's voice. "Imani, are you standing out there running your mouth? Come cook," and Imani straightened. "I have to go." "Dorian," he said, holding out a hand. "Imani." She took it. Her hand was rougher than a 24-year-old's hand should be, and he noticed, and he had the sudden violent thought that he would like to make a phone call about it, and he put the thought away. She gave him one small smile. Not the market smile, not the careful smile, a real one. Brief, and went inside to cook a meal she would not be thanked for. Dorian walked back to Otis's house the long way. That evening, Otis was on the back steps, oiling a hinge that didn't need it, which was his way of being available. "You've got a face on," Otis said. Dorian sat down beside him. "You know a girl named Imani?" "Robinson. Lives with a Rhonda Coleman off Boone." Otis set the hinge down. "Everybody on this side knows that child. Best-hearted girl on the street, and the worst treated. Since her daddy passed, that woman's had her running like hired help. She doesn't have to pay." He shook his head slow. "And there's money trouble in that house. Bad money trouble. The kind that don't wash off." He looked at Dorian sideways over the reading glasses. "Why?" "She helped an old woman at the market today. Spent her own money to do it. Then got treated like dirt for it and didn't say a word back." Otis was quiet a moment. Then he picked the hinge back up. "That sounds about right," he said. "You want my advice, son? You leave it be. Girl like that don't need a man with nothing adding to her load." "I've got more than nothing," Dorian said. "She don't know that." Otis oiled the hinge. "And the day she finds out is the day you find out what you really came here for. So don't be in a hurry to get there." It was, Dorian would think much later, the best advice anyone gave him the whole year, and he only half took it. After that, Dorian found reasons to be where Imani was, and he was honest enough with himself to know they were reasons and not accidents. It wasn't hard. Bankhead was small when you paid attention. She folded clothes at the laundromat on Hollowell most mornings, and Otis's garage always seemed to need a part from the auto store, 2 doors down. And if a man happened to be walking past a laundromat with a fan belt in a bag around 11, and a woman happened to be stepping out to eat a sandwich on the curb because she got 20 minutes and not a minute more, well, people run into each other in a neighborhood. He never crowded her. That was the thing she noticed first, and trusted last, because trust came slow to her and had good reasons to. He didn't lean on her time. He didn't perform. He'd sit on the far end of the curb with his own sandwich, and they'd talk about nothing. A car he was fighting with. A customer who'd tried to stiff Otis. The heat. Always the heat. And some days they didn't talk much at all. And those days were somehow the ones that made her look forward to the next. She carried delivery bags at night. So, it turned out, did a lot of people trying to close the gap between what they made and what they owed. And Dorian started riding. Runs too. On a bike Otis dug out of the garage, partly for the story, and partly because it put him on the same dark streets she was on. And a woman on a bike at midnight with a cracked phone mount is safer with somebody riding the same route. He never said that was why. She never asked. But she stopped being surprised to see his taillight a block back, and after a while, she'd have been uneasy without it. One night, waiting outside a wing spot for an order that was 40 minutes late, she told him the whole thing. She hadn't meant to. It came out sideways, the way the real ones do. "You ever signed something you didn't understand?" she said, watching the door. "Once or twice. He'd signed things that moved millions. He didn't say that. I signed for a loan." She kept her eyes on the door. For Rhonda. Co-signed. She said it was a formality, said it was a salon, said it was family looking out for family. A short breath through the nose that wasn't a laugh. "There's no salon. There's $38,000 and my name on it. And when she stopped paying, it didn't go on her. It went on me. Same as her. Worse than her, because I had a score to wreck and she didn't." Dorian had spent his whole life around money, around men who structured debt for a living, and he still felt something cold go through him, because he was hearing it now, not as a structure, but as a person it had been done to. "You know what a cosigner actually is," he said carefully. "Did anybody ever explain it to you?" "Before. I do now." She finally looked at him. "A cosigner isn't a reference. I thought it was like vouching for somebody. It's not. You're a second borrower. The whole debt's yours the same day it's theirs. They don't have to come after her first and me second. They come after whoever's easier, and I was easier, because I actually cared what happened to my name." She looked back at the door. "Nobody tells you that. There's no class for it. You find out when it's already done. You can dispute a debt if you were misled into it," Dorian said, and then made himself slow down, because Dorian Hughes knew exactly how you did that, and Dorian the mechanic could not possibly know. "I mean, I heard once. If somebody lied to get your signature, there's a word for it. Fraud in the something, there's a word. There's no word that gets me a lawyer," Imani said. "Not bitter, just accurate. A lawyer costs money. The whole reason I'm in this is I don't have money. That's the joke of it. The people who most need the law can least afford to go get it." The order came up. She stood, hooked the bag. "Anyway, that's why I can't just leave. Everybody always says, 'Girl, why don't you just go?' Like there's a door. My name's chained to hers for 7 years minimum. You don't walk away from your own name." There was a night, a week or so after that Dorian would come back to for the rest of his life. Though nothing happened in it that would look like anything from the outside. Imani's bike had a flat 2 miles from home, past 11, in a stretch off Hollowell, where the streetlights had been out so long the city had stopped, pretending it would fix them. She had 4 deliveries, still in the bag, going cold, and a phone at 9%, and no way to fix a tire, and she was standing over the bike, doing the thing she did when things went wrong, which was to go very still and breathe and refuse, on principle, to cry about a tire. Dorian was a block back, as usual. He came up, took one look, and got down on the curb with the bike across his knees. "You carry a patch kit," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd checked her bike once, quietly, weeks ago, and put a kit in the saddlebag she didn't know was there. "I don't know what half that stuff is. I do." He had the tire off the rim in 90 seconds, hands moving on their own, and it was the first time she'd seen him work. Really work. Fast and sure and unbothered. A man who knew exactly what he was doing with a broken thing in the dark. And something about it snagged in her, because it didn't match the story of a man who'd lost his shop and come to town beaten. It matched a man who'd never been beaten at anything in his life. She filed it away without knowing why. "You were good at your job," she said. "Before Macon, whatever it was." His hands paused, just for a second, on the tube. "I was all right." "No." She watched him. "You were good. People aren't that calm about things they're bad at." He got the patch on and the tire back and the bike upright. And he handed it to her, and for a moment in the dead streetlight, they were just two people who'd fixed a small, terrible thing together at midnight. And she said, "Why are you like this?" "Like what?" "Kind for no reason." "Nobody's kind for no reason. There's always a bill later. I keep waiting for your bill." She said it plainly. No accusation, just the accounting of a person who'd been billed her whole life. "So, what is it? What do you want from me?" "Dorian." He looked at her a long moment in the dark, and the honest answer was so large, and so impossible to say, that he gave her the only true piece of it he could. "I want to see what happens," he said. "If just once you get helped and there's no bill." She rode the 4 cold deliveries out and came back and thought about that sentence for 3 days. She rode off into the dark, and Dorian sat on the curb with his heart, doing something it hadn't done in the boardroom, in the tower, in the whole engineered quiet of his life. And he understood that Otis had been right, and that it was already too late to be careful. He was falling for a woman who did not know he could erase her nightmare with a signature. And the not-telling had gone from a plan to a lie somewhere he couldn't pinpoint. And he was going to have to answer for it. He knew that already. He just didn't know the shape it would take. What he did, instead of telling her, was start to test her, and he was not proud of it. And he did it anyway, because he'd come 9 miles and a whole life to find out one thing, and here it was in front of him. The first test wasn't even a test. It was just the truth, and watching what she did with it. She thought he was a broke mechanic living in his uncle's back room, and she treated him like he was worth talking to. That was the base of it. He'd been treated like a wallet his whole life. She treated him like a person before she had any evidence he was one worth the trouble. That alone was more than most people in the Peachtree Tower had ever managed. The second test he built on purpose, and it cost him something to do it. He told her, one evening on Otis's steps where she'd started to come by, that he'd lost the work, that Otis's garage couldn't carry 2 men through a slow month, that the parts runs had dried up, that he was down to nothing, and thinking he might have to move on, go back to Macon, try again somewhere cheaper. He watched her face while he said it. He was watching for the flicker, the small recalculation he'd seen 100 times, the moment a woman's eyes adjust to a man who's just become less useful. It didn't come. What came instead was Imani, tired from a double, reaching into the delivery bag she hadn't turned in yet, and taking out the sandwich she'd bought for her own dinner, the only thing she'd eat till morning, and tearing it in half, and holding half out to him without a word, because a man who's lost his work needs to eat before a man who still has hers. "Don't go back to Macon broke," she said. "Broke follows you. Stay where somebody knows your name. That's worth more than the rent's cheaper somewhere." She pushed the half sandwich an inch closer. "Eat. You think better fed." Dorian took the bread. He ate it. It was the best thing he'd eaten in a year, in that tower, at any table. And he had to look away from her for a second, so she wouldn't see what his face was doing. The third test he did not build. Rhonda built it, and it was the real one, and it nearly took Imani down. It started with Chanel Sterling, though Imani would not learn that name for a while. Chanel had not enjoyed being stood up at the altar of a merger she'd already decorated in her head. 26, Wharton, 3 languages, and a father who owned the West Side blocks. She had been raised to understand herself as the natural terminus of a man like Dorian Hughes, and when Dorian vanished without explanation, she did not weep. She made inquiries. Chanel was very good at inquiries. It took her people 3 weeks and a great deal of money to trace a Hughes family maintenance man's personal truck to a street off Boone and to photograph, from a car with tinted windows, an heir to $400 million carrying a delivery bag on a bicycle behind a laundromat girl. She did not go to the press. Press was a blunt instrument, and Chanel preferred a scalpel. She wanted the girl gone, quietly. And she wanted Dorian to come back to Buckhead, having learned that his little experiment produced exactly the result his mother had predicted. A woman who'd take money over him. The second money was on the table. So Chanel found the one lever in Imani's life that was already loaded, and she paid to pull it. The lever was a man named Reggie Payne. Reggie was a debt buyer, mid-level, the kind who purchases charged-off paper for pennies and squeezes people for dollars. He held, among a portfolio of other people's ruin, $38,000 of Coleman Robinson debt that he'd bought for $4,000. Chanel's people made Reggie an offer that made his week, an extra sum, cash, if he'd go to the Robinson girl in person and put a specific proposition to her, not a threat. An offer. That was the elegance of it. He came to the laundromat on a Thursday, in a car too nice for the block, and he waited until Imani's shift ended, and he introduced himself as the man who owned her debt, which was true, and he watched her go pale, which he was used to. "I'm not here to collect," Reggie said, leaning on the folding table. "I'm here to make you a rich woman's problem disappear. You listen close. This is the best day of your life." He slid a paper across the table. "There's a gentleman. Serious money. He's seen you around. He likes what he sees. He's the marrying kind, and he's not particular about your credit, because he's got enough for 2. You marry him. Proper. In a church, whatever you want. And the day you do, your $38,000 goes away. Gone. Zeroed. Your name comes clean. You walk out of whatever hole you're in, and you never fold another stranger's drawers again." Imani looked at the paper. She didn't touch it. "There's just the one condition," Reggie said, "and it's nothing. The gentleman's a proud man, he doesn't share. So the grease monkey situation you've got going, the mechanic, the bike that ends. Tonight, you cut it off, you don't explain it, you don't look back, and I hand you a life." He smiled. 38 grand, sweetheart, for dropping a man who can't even fix his own credit, let alone yours. That's not a hard call. That's not even a call. Here is what Imani Robinson did. She stood there in the laundromat, in the smell of hot lint and dryer sheets. 24 years old. 541 credit score. 1 meal that day. A debt around her neck that wasn't hers. And a whole free clean life sitting on a table 2 feet from her hand. And she understood exactly what she was being offered and exactly what it cost. And she felt. She would tell Dorian later, when she could tell him anything. She felt the pull of it. She wasn't a saint. She wanted out. God, she wanted out. And then she thought about a man tearing a sandwich in half. About a taillight 1 block back on a dark street. About the only person in 3 years who'd looked at her and seen a person before he saw a use. "No," she said. Reggie blinked. "I don't think you heard the number." "I heard it." Her voice shook and held. "You want me to sell the one good thing I've got for the thing that's already killing me. You want me to marry a stranger to escape a debt a stranger stuck me with, and you dressed it up like a gift." She pushed the paper back across the table with one finger, all the way, until it dropped off the edge into his lap. "Take your paper." "Tell your gentleman," I said. "The mechanic's worth more broke than he is rich. Now get out of my job before I call my manager." Reggie left. He was, despite himself, a little impressed and a lot annoyed, because now he had to make a call to some tinted window people and tell them the girl said no. And people like that do not like the word no, he told them. And Chanel Sterling, when the message reached her, set down her wine very carefully and understood that she had just accidentally proven her rival's entire point, and she was not a woman who took being wrong lying down. If the girl wouldn't take the money, the girl would take the fall. Chanel started planning something uglier. Imani told no one about Reggie. She was too shaken and too used to carrying things alone. But she was different for a few days, quieter, quicker to flinch, and Dorian saw it and asked, and she said it was nothing, and he let it be, and hated letting it be. What broke it open was Bianca. Bianca had been watching Imani and the mechanic for weeks with the particular attention of a person who can't stand to see someone she's decided is beneath her have something she doesn't. She followed Imani to the little strip of dirt behind the church, where Imani and Dorian sometimes sat at the end of a shift, and she hid behind the corner of the fellowship hall with her phone out, and she got what she wanted. Not much. They weren't doing anything, but enough. Dorian saying something low. Imani laughing, actually laughing, in a way she never laughed in the house. Bianca filmed the laugh like it was evidence of a crime and ran home to her mother. "Mama!" Breathless, delighted, poison. "Imani's got a man. That nasty grease monkey from the market. She sneaks off to see him. I got video." Rhonda's face did a thing that had nothing to do with morals and everything to do with money. Because Rhonda had her own math running, Reggie's people had come to her too, before they'd gone to Imani. Chanel had covered the angles and offered Rhonda a cut if she'd push the girl toward the marriage. Rhonda had said yes to that money in her heart before the man finished the sentence. $38,000 off her own back, plus a little walking around cash, for the price of shoving a stepdaughter she didn't love into a marriage she'd never have to think about again. And now here was that same stepdaughter throwing the whole payday away for a man who smelled like a transmission. So when Imani came home that night, Rhonda was waiting on the porch, and she came off it fast, and she slapped Imani across the face hard enough to turn her head. Ungrateful. Stupid, ungrateful girl. Each word its own blow, though only the first was a real one. "You had a way out of this house, sitting in your hand, and you spit on it for a bum?" Imani held her cheek. Her eyes filled, but nothing fell. Old training. Dorian had walked her most of the way home as he did, hanging back at the corner as he always did, and he saw the slap, and he was moving before he'd decided to move. "Don't." Just that. One word, but it came from him in a register nobody on that street had heard. A boardroom register, and it stopped Rhonda's raised hand in the air. She turned and saw the mechanic and recovered fast. Oh, the boyfriend. You followed her here." She looked him over, the coveralls, the boots, and she laughed, the family laugh, the same one Bianca had learned from her. "Let me tell you something, grease monkey. You cost me $38,000 tonight." You. A man who can't rub two clean dollars together talked this fool girl out of a real man and a real life. "You want her? You think you're worth her?" She stepped down off the porch. "Prove it. You come up with what her freedom's worth, and you can have her. $38,000, cash, on this porch, and I'll sign her over to you like a car title, because that's about what she's worth to me. You've got 7 days. 7 days. And if you're $1 short, you never set foot on my street again." She was performing, mostly. She was certain no backroom mechanic could produce $38,000 in 7 days or 7 years, and the certainty felt like winning. She even went inside and came back with a piece of paper and a pen. An old habit. Rhonda liked things in writing when the writing favored her, and she wrote it down, the number, the 7 days, the terms, and signed it with a flourish and shoved it at Dorian. There. Now it's official. Bring me $38,000 or get off my porch and stay off. Imani was crying now, quietly. The way she did everything. Dorian, no, don't. Please don't let her. I'm not worth you going into a hole for. I'm already a hole. I'll pull you down in it. Please just go. Dorian took the paper. He folded it once, along Rhonda's signature, and put it in the chest pocket of his coveralls, and the small motion of it. A working man, calmly pocketing a debt slip like a receipt, made Rhonda's smile flicker for the first time, because it was not the motion of a man who'd been beaten. He looked at Imani, and everything he wanted to tell her was right there, and he couldn't say any of it, not yet. Not like this, on this porch, as this man. So he said the only true thing he could say as who he was standing there as. 7 days, Dorian said. Then, from his other pocket, without thinking, he pulled out a rag to wipe his hands. And along with the rag came the wrench, the old adjustable wrench he carried everywhere, worn smooth, with 2 letters cut into the steel of the handle, deep by a machine that no longer existed. H. Bianca, filming still, caught it in the frame without knowing what it was. It clinked on the porch step. Dorian picked it up, put it back, and walked into the dark. And nobody on that porch understood that they had just watched a Hughes pocket, the family's oldest tool next to a stranger's debt, and promised to pay it in 7 days. Behind him, on the porch, Bianca lowered her phone with a strange look, because the video had auto-uploaded to her cloud along with everything else, and buried in her camera roll now, next to 1,000 selfies, was 13 seconds that would matter more than she could imagine. A laugh, a slap, a raised hand stopped by 1 word and 2 letters on a wrench. That night, Dorian did not sleep in the back room. He sat with Otis at the kitchen table under a bare bulb and put the folded paper down between them and told him all of it. Otis read Rhonda's slanting handwriting slow, glasses down his nose, and when he was done, he took them off and rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "This woman would sell the sun if she held the deed." Dorian told him about Reggie, about the marriage offer, about the money he now understood had come from somewhere with a longer reach than a bankhead porch. Somebody spent real money to try to buy Imani out of my life. That's not Rhonda. Rhonda doesn't have real money, that's the whole problem. Somebody's steering this. Otis looked at him a long moment. You know who? I've got a guess. Dorian's jaw set, and if I'm right, she made 1 mistake. She put a debt buyer and a marriage offer and my name in the same room. That's not just cruel. Depending on how it was papered, that's fraud. You can't lie to a person to get their signature, and you can't pay a third party to coerce a marriage to extinguish a debt. There's a name for what that is, and there's a courtroom for it. He pressed his thumb against the 2 letters on the wrench, the way his father used to when he was thinking. I came down here to test a heart. I found the heart on day 11, and I've known for weeks. I stayed because I was afraid of the day she'd learn who I am. That was selfish, and it's done. Time to end it. How you want to end it. Loud, Dorian said. In front of everyone who ever laughed at her. And clean. No tricks. Nothing a lawyer could pick apart. Real paper. Real proof. I want Rhonda Coleman to lose this in a way she can't lie her way out of. And I want Imani standing in a room full of the people who counted her as nothing while it happens. Otis put his glasses back on. That's not 7 days of work, son. It is if I stop being a mechanic tomorrow morning. Before sunrise, Otis drove the old truck back east and the buildings climbed, and the languages changed back. And by the time the sun was up, they were pulling into the service entrance under the Peachtree Tower, where a man in a $2,000 suit was waiting, because Otis had called ahead. The guards at the service door did not recognize the man in the filthy coveralls with the split knuckles and the dark tan a mechanic gets. And an heir does not, until he pulled back his hood, and then one of them said, "Mr. Hughes," and nearly dropped his radio. Vivian Hughes was in her office on 40 when her son walked in unannounced, and she stood up, which she did for almost no one. She looked at him, the coveralls, the hands, the face burned darker by 3 months of real sun, leaner, older somehow, and something in the eyes that had not been there in the boardroom. For a moment, she was not a chairman. She was a mother looking at a boy who'd come back changed, and she didn't like how much it moved her. "You look," she said, "like your father." "I found her," Dorian said. Vivian sat back down slowly. "Tell me," he told her. Not the pitch he'd have given the board, the truth. A girl who spent her last $2 on a stranger's dignity. A girl who tore a sandwich in half for a man she thought had nothing. A girl who was offered $38,000 and a clean name to walk away from a broke mechanic, and said no, not knowing the mechanic could clear the debt with a phone call, not knowing anything except that some things you don't sell. Vivian was quiet a long time. She had spent 30 years building a person who could hear that story and locate the leverage in it. She was appalled to find that the older part of her, the part that had loved a man with a toolbox, heard it and simply believed it. Her name, Vivian said, Imani Robinson. From English Avenue, off Boone, is her family. She doesn't have family. Mother. She has a stepmother who put a $38,000 debt on her by fraud and just tried to sell her into a marriage to erase it. That's what she has. He set the folded paper on his mother's desk, Rhonda's signature up. This is a bill of sale for a human being, written by a woman who thinks she's clever. I want to answer it. I need the legal team, and I need them today, and I need you to not fight me on this one. Vivian looked at the paper for a long moment. Then she did something Dorian had not seen her do since his father's funeral. She reached across the desk and put her hand over his ruined mechanic's hand, and she left it there. There was a woman, Vivian said. The board wanted your grandfather to marry, for blocks we needed. The year before he met your grandmother. He said no. Everybody told him it was a foolish, expensive, sentimental thing to do. Her mouth moved into something that was almost a smile. Sit down. Tell the team everything. And Dorian. She held his eyes. The Sterling girl. You think she's the reach behind the debt buyer. I know she is. I just have to prove it. Then we'll prove it, said Vivian Hughes, chairman of a $400 million company, cracking her knuckles like the mechanic's daughter she had started life as. Nobody buys my son's future wife off a porch and walks away smiling. Not even a Sterling. What followed was 6 days of the kind of work that doesn't look like anything from the outside. Lawyers pulling the original loan file. A forensic accountant tracing $38,000 out of a fake salon and into Rhonda's actual spending. None of it a business. The paper trail on Reggie Payne's portfolio, and here was the thread that hanged them. The wire that had paid Reggie his bonus for the marriage errand, routed through a shell, but not routed cleverly enough, because Chanel had used a fixer who cut corners, and corners are where forensic accountants live. And a subpoena, once the fraud claim was filed, that reached Reggie Payne himself, who was a debt buyer and not a martyr, and who gave up the name behind the tinted windows in about 90 seconds when he understood the alternative. Hughes Holdings bought the Coleman Robinson debt from Reggie's portfolio at face value, which Reggie was thrilled about right up until he understood it was being bought, so it could be used against the person who'd hired him. And there was one more piece, and it came from the last place anyone would look. Otis, who knew everyone, knew a boy who knew Bianca, and Bianca, vain, careless Bianca, had her camera roll set to auto-upload to a cloud account whose password was her own birthday. It took the lawyers an afternoon and a properly worded request. In it, 13 seconds of a July night. Rhonda's raised hand, one word stopping it, and, though Bianca had never once looked closely at her own footage, 38 seconds earlier, a different clip. Rhonda on that same porch a week before, on the phone, not knowing her daughter was filming her for a dance video, saying in her own voice, clear as church, "Girl, I don't care how she feels. 38 grand off my back and a little extra. She can marry a fence post for all I care. Just get her to sign. Consent to record in Georgia requires one party. Bianca had been that party. She had, in her endless self-documentation, recorded her own mother confessing. On the 7th day, Dorian Hughes went back to Bankhead, but not the way he'd left it. Rhonda Coleman heard the engines before she saw them. She was on the porch in her stop sign robe, and Bianca was beside her in the crimson dress she'd bought for the Sterling party that had, strangely, never happened. And the two of them had spent the week telling anyone who'd listen that the grease monkey would never show, that Imani had ruined a good match, that some people are just born to lose. The engines got louder. Down the block, off Boone, came a line of black SUVs, 4 of them, moving slow, and behind them a dark sedan with a driver, and the whole street came out onto its porches to watch. Because a convoy like that on English Avenue meant a funeral or a raid, and this was neither. The cars stopped in front of Rhonda's house. Rhonda stood up, and her first thought, because her mind ran on one track, was that the rich gentleman had come after all, that the marriage was back on, that her payday had arrived in style, and she pressed her hands to her chest and said, "Bianca, get up, straighten your dress." The door of the sedan opened, and a man got out, and it took the whole street a full 3 seconds to understand what they were looking at, because he was wearing a suit the color of midnight cut, so well it looked poured on, and his shoes caught the sun, and his hands. And this was what broke it. His hands were the split, collused, oil-stained hands of a Bankhead mechanic, on a man dressed like the cover of a magazine. "Grease monkey," Bianca whispered, and did not laugh. Imani came out of the house last. She had been in the back, and she'd heard the noise, and she came around the side, wiping her hands on a rag, and stopped dead at the corner of the porch. She looked at him, at the suit, at the cars, at the men standing beside the cars with the particular stillness of people who are paid to stand beside cars. And her face did something complicated and terrible, because she was a smart woman, and she was already doing the math, and the math was landing. "Dorian," she said, barely. "Imani, what is this?" Her voice was climbing. "What? Who are these people? Who are you?" He took a step toward her, and she took one back, and that step back stopped him where he stood, and it hurt more than the coffee, more than anything the year had cost him. "My name is Dorian Hughes," he said, and he said it quietly, into a silent street. "Hughes Holdings. My family owns the tower on Peachtree, and about a third of the buildings you can see from the top of it." He let it sit. "I'm not a mechanic. I never lost a shop in Macon. I came down here 3 months ago because I couldn't find one single person in my whole life who'd treat me decent before they knew what I was worth. So I made myself worth nothing, and I came here, and I watched." Rhonda had gone the color of ash under her robe. Imani's eyes had filled, and this time it spilled, and it wasn't the quiet crying, it was the other kind. You lied to me. She said it like she was tasting it. All of it. The bike. The sandwich. You let me. I told you things. I told you about the debt. I told you I was drowning. And the whole time you had. Her voice broke. Was I a test? Is that what this was? You came down here and picked out the sad, broke girl and ran your little experiment to see if she'd. You were never an experiment. He said it hard, the only hard thing he'd said. Everyone else was the experiment. You were the answer. I knew what you were on day 11, Imani, at that market, when you spent your last $2 on Miss Clara's tomatoes. Everything after that was me being a coward. I should have told you a month ago, and I didn't, because I was scared of exactly this, of you looking at me exactly like you're looking at me right now. And I earned it. I did. But hear me. I did not lie about one single thing I felt. Not one. She was shaking her head, crying, and she didn't step forward, but she didn't go back inside either. And that was the whole story of the next 10 seconds. A woman deciding, and Dorian had the sense not to fill the silence. Then Rhonda, God help her, chose that moment to save herself. Baby. Rhonda came off the porch with her arms already opening, robe and all, voice gone sweet as a funeral. My baby girl. See, didn't I always tell you good things come to those who… Mr. Hughes, sir, I raised this girl like my own. I sacrificed for her. Everything I did for her. Stop. Dorian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Please stop talking, Mrs. Coleman, because every word you say is going in a court file, and you've said enough of those already. He lifted one hand, and a woman stepped out of the second SUV, sharp suit, thick folder, and Rhonda's sweet face began to come apart. This is my attorney, Dorian said. And this is $38,000 of debt that you put on Imani's name by fraud. You told her it was a business loan for a salon. There was no salon. We have the loan file. We have the accounting. We have every dollar of that money traced into your spending, not 1 cent of it, a business. The attorney opened the folder. That's called fraud in the inducement. You lied to get her signature. In this state that doesn't just void her half of the debt, it opens you up to civil damages, and depending on the DA's mood, worse. You can't. She signed it. She signed it herself. It's her name. It is her name, Dorian said, which you obtained by lying. That's the whole crime. A signature you tricked out of somebody isn't consent, it's evidence. He nodded, and the attorney laid a single sheet on the porch rail. This is a filing that's already in. The debt against Imani Robinson is disputed and, as of an hour ago, purchased outright by Hughes Holdings and marked paid in full. Her name's clean. Tonight. Whatever else happens on this porch, that part's already done. Imani made a sound like she'd been holding her breath for 2 years. But Rhonda wasn't the end of it, and Dorian turned, unhurried, to the crimson dress. Bianca. Bianca clutched her phone to her chest like it could protect her. You've been filming this family for years, Dorian said. You film everything. You filmed the market. You filmed the slap. You filmed me. A pause. You also filmed your mother. 3 weeks ago. On this porch, on the phone. Bianca's face went white. The attorney read it, flat, from the file into the silent street in Rhonda's own words. I don't care how she feels. 38 grand off my back, and a little extra. She can marry a fence post for all I care. Just get her to sign. Nobody on that street breathed. Rhonda's mouth opened and no sound came out. Bianca was staring at her phone in her own hand like it had bitten her, understanding, too late, that the thing she used to make herself the center of every moment had made her the witness against her own mother. A little extra, Dorian repeated softly. That's the part that names the last person. Because you weren't going to get a little extra from a debt buyer's own pocket. Mrs. Coleman. Somebody was paying. Somebody with real money wanted Imani married off and gone. He turned then, finally, to the dark sedan he'd arrived in, and the back window rolled down. And Chanel Sterling sat there in the shadow of the car, because Dorian had invited her. Because the cruelest thing you can do to a scalpel is make it watch. You want to tell them, or should I? Chanel said nothing. Her face was a closed door. Chanel Sterling, Dorian said to the street. The woman my family wanted me to marry for 2 blocks on the west side. She had me followed. She found Imani. She paid a debt buyer named Reggie Payne to offer Imani a marriage that would clear the debt if Imani would drop the broke mechanic. She spent tens of thousands of dollars, out of pride, to try to prove that a poor girl would always take the money. He looked at Imani, and his voice changed. And Imani said no, not knowing I had a dime, not knowing any of this. She sat in a laundromat with a cleaned knife at the table, and she pushed it back across. Because the man she thought she was choosing had nothing, and she chose him anyway. The window went back up. The sedan pulled away from the curb and out of the story, carrying a woman who had spent a fortune to disprove the one thing that turned out to be true. The street stayed silent. And then, from a folding chair 3 houses down where she'd been sitting the whole time, old Miss Clara from the market started, slowly with her bad hands, to clap. The clapping did not fix it. That is the part the movies get wrong. Imani did not run into his arms on that porch. She stood there with a clean name she'd wanted for 2 years, and a broken trust she hadn't seen coming. And both of those things were true at the same time. And she was too honest a person to pretend the second one away because of the first. You cleared my debt, she said. Thank you. I mean that. You have no idea what. Thank you. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. And I need you to leave now. Dorian went still. Imani, you lied to me for 3 months. Steady now, which was worse than shouting. I don't care how good the reason was. You sat on my curb and let me hand you half my dinner because I thought you were hungry. You know how that feels, right now, standing here? You made me feel like a fool for being kind. That's the one thing in my life nobody ever got to make me feel, because being kind was the only thing that was still mine. Her voice cracked and held. So no, not tonight. You don't get to fix 3 months of lying with one big, rich gesture and a folder. That's not how a person works. That's how a checkbook works. And Dorian Hughes, who could have said a dozen smooth things, did the one right thing instead, which was to accept it. Okay, he said. You're right, I'll go. He took a card out of his suit. Not a company card, a plain one, a number handwritten on the back. This is my actual phone, not Rhonda's account. Yours to call or not call, on your time, never mine. He set it on the porch rail, next to the filing that had freed her. I'm sorry, Imani, not for coming here, for not trusting you with the truth sooner. That was mine, and I got it wrong, and clearing a debt doesn't buy it back. I know that. He left. The cars pulled away, and Imani stood on the porch holding a business card and a court filing, in a house that had gone very quiet, with a stepmother who could no longer meet her eyes. She called him 9 days later, not before. She needed the 9 days, and the fact that he let her have them, without a single text, without a flower, without one more grand gesture, that was, in the end, what did it. A man who respected a no was a man she could believe about a yes. When she called, she didn't say, I forgive you, she said. I got a letter from the credit bureau. It really is gone. The whole thing, it's really gone. And then, after a silence, I don't know how to not owe anybody anything. I've never done that before. I don't know who I am without a weight on me. Then let's find out, Dorian said. Slow. No cars. I'll come as me, and you can decide about me the same way you decided when you thought I was broke. That's the only version of this I want anyway. The broke version was easier. The broke version was real. This is the same guy. Worse hands, better suit. She laughed. It was the church laugh. The real one, the one Bianca had filmed like a crime, and it was the first thing that had felt like solid ground under her in 3 years. They did it slow. He came as himself. She met his mother. Vivian Hughes had built a person who could find leverage in anyone. And she turned the full force of that on Imani Robinson, across a dinner table on the 40th floor, and what she found was a young woman who thanked the man, who refilled her water, who didn't pretend to know which fork, who said, "I don't know what that word means," when Vivian used a word she didn't know instead of nodding along, and who, when Vivian asked her flat out what she wanted from Dorian, said, "Nothing. That's the problem, honestly. I already got the only thing I ever wanted off him, and it was free. He cleared a debt that was killing me, and then he left when I told him to. I don't need his money. I've been poor my whole life, ma'am. I know how to be poor. I don't know how to be lied to by somebody I trust. That's the only thing I'm still deciding about." Vivian set down her fork. She had spent the meal looking for the gold digger. Her son had been warned about his whole life. And she had found, instead, a woman who'd said no to $38,000. And she understood, at last, why he'd burned a year to find her. "He won't lie to you again," Vivian said. "I raised him to be many things. A coward wasn't supposed to be one of them, and he was one, once, with you. And it's the only time I've ever known him to be. Take that for whatever it's worth from a mother." She picked the fork back up. "For what it's worth from a chairman. I fought this. I wanted him to marry money and blocks. I was wrong, and I don't say that at this table twice a decade. You may quote me. No one will believe you." The restorative part came slower still, and it was Imani who insisted on it, which surprised everyone, including Imani. Rhonda Coleman was facing real charges. The fraud was documented. The recording was clean. The DA was interested. Dorian's instinct, and Vivian's, was to let it run all the way to the wall. And Imani said no. "Not because she deserves mercy," Imani said. "She doesn't. I'm not confused about that. But I've watched what happens to people around here who go all the way through that system. And it doesn't come back out better. It comes back out worse. And I'm not going to spend the rest of my life as the reason. Another person got fed into that machine, even her. That's not me being a saint. That's me not wanting to become somebody who does that. There's a difference." So they built something else. The debt was gone. Rhonda signed a settlement. Full restitution of the $38,000. Garnished slow from wages at a real job. Otis's church connections found her. And a court-supervised repayment that would take her years and teach her, dollar by grinding dollar, exactly what she'd tried to spend of Imani's life. She kept the house, barely, on those terms. Bianca, whose own phone had convicted her mother, moved out and moved in with a cousin. And last anyone heard was quieter and worked a register, and had stopped filming everything, which for Bianca was the beginning of becoming a person. It was justice. It just wasn't revenge. Imani had learned the difference the hard way and chose it on purpose, and that choice was the most powerful thing she did in the whole story, more than any car in any convoy. They married in the spring in a church on the west side, not a Buckhead ballroom. Imani's choice. And Dorian didn't argue, because arguing with her about what was real was a thing he'd promised himself he was done doing. Miss Clara came. Pops Otis walked Imani down the aisle, because there was no one else to do it, and because he'd earned it. And Hughes Holdings had, that spring, quietly made Otis Freeman a very comfortable man for the rest of his days, and given him his name on the door of a training garage in Bankhead, where kids who'd otherwise never get a shot could learn a trade for free. Dorian stood up at the reception, in front of Buckhead money and Bankhead neighbors, mixed together in a room for maybe the first time in the history of either. And he did not give a rich man's speech. 3 months in this neighborhood taught me something the tower never could, he said. You want to know who holds a city up? Don't look at the top of the buildings. Look at the people the buildings are named after. And then look at the people who fix the elevators in them. And understand it's the second group keeping the first group's name off the ground. He found Miss Clara in the crowd. A woman sold me tomatoes for 30 years, and I never knew her name until my wife taught it to me by respecting it. Clara. Miss Clara. The man who delivers your food. The woman folding your clothes. The one under your car at 995 degrees, so you can get to a job that pays her nothing to keep you moving. We are trained to look through those people. This neighborhood looked at a man it thought was one of them, and one person. One. Looked at that man like he was worth the trouble anyway. He raised his glass to Imani. She didn't marry up. I married up. Everybody in this room who thinks otherwise has the arithmetic exactly backwards, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it to them. And Hughes Holdings, that year, started something they called the Clara Fund. No cameras, Imani insisted. No cameras that did two boring, enormous things. It bought and forgave predatory debt held against families on the West Side, the kind of charged-off paper that traps people the way it had trapped Imani. And it ran a free class every week in the back of Otis's training garage, on the one thing nobody had ever taught a 22-year-old girl at a kitchen table with a pen in her hand. What a cosigner actually is, what a credit score actually does. How to read the paper before you sign the paper. How to tell family looking out for family, from family looking to use you, when the two of them use the exact same words. Imani taught the first class herself. She was nervous. She told them the truth, which is the only thing she'd ever had to offer, and the only thing that had ever been worth anything. I signed something I didn't understand because I wanted to be loved, and it cost me 2 years of my life, and nobody warned me, so I'm warning you. 40 people came. The next week, 60. She kept the wrench. Dorian gave it to her, the old one, worn smooth, 2 letters cut in the steel, and she kept it on the windowsill of a house with a door that locked in the good part of Grove Park, where the AC worked, and where, most mornings, she still woke before the sun out of a habit her body wouldn't let go of, and stood at the window and hummed a song her mother used to hum, where now, at last, someone was awake to hear it. A quick word before you go, and this part isn't the story. Everything you just heard is dramatized, but the machinery underneath it is not. Co-signing alone really does make you a full second borrower, not a character reference. If the other person stops paying, the debt and the credit damage land on you, immediately and equally, and this catches good people every single year. Fraud in the inducement, being lied to in order to obtain your signature, is a real legal concept, but how it plays out varies a great deal from state to state, and none of what you heard tonight is legal advice. If a family member is pressuring you to sign for a loan, or if someone has put debt on your name through deception, talk to a real attorney before you sign anything or accept any settlement. Many communities have free legal aid clinics for exactly this. And if the harder parts of this story touched something real in your own life, for workplace harassment or discrimination, the EEOC is reachable at 1-800-669-4000. If you're being controlled or abused by someone in your home, financially or otherwise, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. And if the weight ever gets to be more than you can carry alone, call or text 988 any hour of any day and a real person will answer. I'll tell you the honest reason I wanted to tell this one. I've watched people I love get talked into signing things by family with that same phrase. Family looks out for family. And I've watched what it costs them, and I've watched how much shame they carry for a thing that was never their fault, only their kindness. So if you take one thing from a made-up story about a made-up mechanic, take this: your kindness is not a weakness somebody else gets to spend. Guard it. But don't let anybody, not a stepmother, not a debt buyer, not a whole street full of people looking through you, talk you out of being the person who picks the tomatoes up off the ground. The world runs on those people. It just doesn't always clap for them. Tonight, in this one small corner of it, it did.